So I'm saying, let me think outside the box. Maybe his mama done it. Maybe her mama done it and set him up. Maybe one of them racist uncles or cousins don't like a maybe the other boyfriend done it. Maybe the pimp who was sex trafficking her for the last year when she ran away done it. Why would they let him walk this freely? Only to lose endorsements and sponsorships and cancel shows and not his freedom. In the climate that we're in. Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Just like that, Charleston White flipped the whole script and straight up declared David innocent. And he didn't just talk, he brought receipts nobody saw coming. The so-called proof he revealed hit the industry like a lightning strike, turning the case upside down and leaving everyone asking if the media had been lying to them all along. Think about it. The moment news broke that a dismembered body was found stuffed inside a Tesla registered to David, the internet went crazy. Blogs ran wild, headlines screamed guilty, and his name got dragged through the mud before police even made an arrest. Overnight, David went from rising star to the face of one of the darkest scandals in music, and the world was ready to cancel him on the spot. Fans argued nonstop, dissecting his lyrics like they were hidden confessions, saying tracks hinted at blood, betrayal, and secrets too twisted to ignore. Big brands cut ties instantly, tossing him aside like damaged goods to save their image. For weeks, David was left standing in the storm alone. Nobody wanted to be seen defending him. Nobody except one man bold enough to risk it all. Enter Charleston White, the internet's most raw, unfiltered voice. Known for saying what others whisper in the dark, Charleston didn't flinch. He didn't play safe. Instead, he shocked everyone by stepping into the fire and saying David was not guilty.
Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Fuck out of here. All the evidence that's out there.
And here's the kicker. He claimed the very fact that David hadn't been arrested was the clearest sign the police didn't have a case. That statement wasn't just loud, it was explosive. Charleston basically told the world, y'all been duped. And suddenly the conversation shifted from David did it to what if they got this all wrong? This wasn't some throwaway line from Charleston. He came back swinging, doubling down with logic he swore nobody could ignore. To him, the signs were crystal clear. In America, especially when it comes to young black men, cops don't wait around for perfect evidence. They'll snatch you up off the streets with scraps of proof, toss you in a cell, and figure the rest out later. So if David really had blood on his hands, Charleston argued, he'd already be locked up and paraded in front of cameras like a trophy arrest. Look, Charleston pressed, they arrest brothers every day for way less than this. They'll cuff you just to say they did it. That was his point, and it cut deep. If David was truly guilty, authorities would have slapped handcuffs on him the second that Tesla hit the headlines. The fact that he was still free, still performing, still moving around without a single charge.
Listen, hold on. If they find a dead body in me and your car, and this is our car, do you think they'll let me and you stay out like long? They got out. So think about this.
To Charleston, that silence from law enforcement was screaming the truth louder than any gossip blog could. And he didn't just stop there. Charleston went right at the ugliest allegations. The internet had been buzzing with sinister whispers. David linked to an underage girl, tattoos supposedly matching, leaked photos spreading like wildfire, and lyrics fans twisted into dark confessions. Social media painted him as a monster before anyone heard from the courts. But Charleston wasn't buying it. He called it too neat, too clean, too staged, the kind of setup that looks tailor-made to bury someone fast. He laid it out bluntly. How could a black artist be accused of something this gruesome, supposedly tied to a 15-year-old with evidence floating around online, and yet not even a temporary detainment? Not even a single holding charge? That gap didn't smell like justice to Charleston. It smelled like something else entirely. The way he framed it, the whole story didn't line up. He told his audience straight, if this was any regular person, they'd already be sitting behind bars waiting for trial. But David, he was still on stage, still free, still out in public. That wasn't negligence from the cops. That, Charleston argued, was proof. Proof that David just might not be the villain the world was so desperate to paint him as.
So think about this. If they got all this information on him dating a minor, an underage kid, and she looked like a white girl, mixed girl, what they let just stay free like this?
And in true Charleston White fashion, he refused to sugarcoat anything. He made his audience squirm. He pointed straight at the disturbing way the body was found, dismembered, butchered, hidden with chilling precision. That kind of crime, Charleston argued, reeked of planning and brutality way beyond anything David had ever shown. Could it really have been him? Or was someone setting him up, leaving breadcrumbs designed to frame the rising star while the real culprit stayed in the shadows? Think about it, Charleston pushed. They claim they got evidence, say he sliced up the body because it was chopped and butchered, but still no arrest? That single line lit up X, YouTube, and Instagram like wildfire. His take split the internet right down the middle, half the crowd furious, saying he was defending the indefensible, asking how anyone could excuse a teenager's remains showing up in David's Tesla. The other half, they whispered what Charleston dared to say out loud. Maybe this story wasn't so simple after all. And Charleston didn't just drop his opinion and walk away. Oh no, he doubled back again and again, hammering the same question. How is David still walking free if the evidence is so airtight? For Charleston, the absence of an arrest wasn't just suspicious. It was impossible to ignore. The whole narrative smelled off, and he wanted his audience to feel that discomfort deep in their gut. Then he hit them with a bombshell comparison at one of the most infamous trials in history, O.J. Simpson. By bringing up O.J., Charleston wasn't just stirring old ghosts. He was pointing straight at what he called hypocrisy in the justice system. If police can lock men up for the flimsiest circumstantial clues, dragging them through the mud before a single shred of hard proof, then why hadn't they done the same with David, who supposedly had mountains of evidence stacked against him? Charleston leaned in, pushing it darker, daring his audience to question not just David's case, but the entire system that picks and chooses who to take down and who to leave untouched. Charleston didn't just question the case, he started spinning wild, uncomfortable scenarios that flat out suggested someone else could have been behind the crime. These weren't polished courtroom defenses wrapped in neat little bows. No, his takes came raw and jagged, tossed into the public like grenades with the pins already pulled, and that's exactly why his voice traveled so far. He wasn't shackled by evidence rules or cautious lawyer talk. He spoke the language of the people, unfiltered, messy, emotional, and brutally direct. In Charleston's eyes, the entire narrative was shaky. He mocked the idea that David's supposed relationship with the victim was obvious, picking apart details that had gone viral online. Fans had gone crazy over one smoking gun. Both David and the 15-year-old girl had a small tattoo inked on the index finger. Social media blew up with claims it was proof of intimacy, spreading side-by-side photos like gospel. But Charleston wasn't having it. He waved it off as weak evidence, calling it a reach so desperate it looked like the media was manufacturing intimacy out of coincidence. A tattoo? He scoffed. That's all it takes now? To him, this was just another example of how whispers were being stretched into scandal, then plastered across headlines to make David look guilty without a single charge in sight. And then came the moment that set the internet on fire. Charleston crossed into controversial territory, turning his criticism toward the girl herself. His choice of words? Harsh, offensive, explosive enough to make even his supporters flinch.
And I know they said, man, he wrong for calling her a little hoe, but she was. Little girl don't run away from home, little hoes and little bitches do.
But whether people agreed or hated him for it, his core point was loud. He believed David was being used as a scapegoat. That line wasn't just blunt, it was a bombshell. Overnight, clips of his rant bounced from YouTube to Instagram to TikTok, sparking furious debates. Some called him heartless for blaming a victim, while others admitted Charleston was at least saying what nobody else dared to question. The backlash came instantly. Critics blasted Charleston, accusing him of doing the unthinkable, blaming the victim and excusing David by throwing dirt on a child who couldn't even defend herself anymore. To many, it was the lowest blow possible. But Charleston's defenders clapped back just as hard, insisting he wasn't excusing anything. He was flipping the script, forcing people to question whether the story about David had been too one-sided from the very beginning. And in Charleston's world, ugly questions were better than blind acceptance. He leaned on the racial angle like a hammer, striking the same nail over and over, and it became the backbone of his defense. They don't let young black men slide on crimes like this. Not in America, he barked. That single line echoed across X, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere, a rallying cry that cut through the noise. For Charleston, it was simple math. If a young black artist really had committed something this brutal, a body chopped up and dumped in his car, he wouldn't be out walking free. The fact that David was still breathing as an uncharged man didn't scream negligence to Charleston. It screamed that something deeper was in play. That's what set him apart. While the public obsessed over matching tattoos and creepy lyrics, Charleston zoomed out and pointed straight at the bigger picture: race, power, and how the system flips its script when the spotlight is on. To him, this wasn't about proving David innocent with forensics. It was about exposing a justice system that suddenly looked too fair in a case tailor-made for a quick, headline-grabbing conviction. By this stage, Charleston wasn't just poking holes in the case. He was ripping it apart piece by piece, daring anyone to prove him wrong. His voice carried the conviction of a man who'd spent his life studying injustice, watching how it crushes black men without hesitation. And now, faced with a story that checked every box for an easy conviction, Charleston argued the exact opposite. The system had pulled back, and that hesitation was the real proof David might not be guilty at all. Charleston took the same facts the media paraded around and twisted them into a whole new angle: innocence. His logic was strange, even paradoxical, but bold. If David were really guilty, the system wouldn't hesitate. They'd have him in chains already. Instead, Charleston argued the sheer weight of the evidence being flaunted made the lack of arrest even more suspicious. How could cops have all this and still leave David free? To him, it smelled like something bigger, a setup. He leaned into that contradiction, pushing scenarios few others dared to touch. What if this wasn't David's crime at all, he asked. What if somebody staged this, made it look airtight, but left just enough cracks for those who pay attention to see the holes? That kind of speculation turned Charleston's commentary into must-watch content, blasting across YouTube streams, X debates, and Instagram clips. Some viewers dismissed him as reckless, even dangerous, accusing him of playing with fire and disrespecting a victim's death. But others leaned in, nodding quietly. After all, staged scandals and industry cover-ups weren't unheard of in Hollywood or the music business. Why couldn't this be another one? Charleston knew exactly how to keep that tension alive. He never let the conversation drift too far before yanking it back to one glaring fact: David was still free. Y'all want me to believe, he snapped, that a 20-year-old rapper dating a 13-year-old girl found with her body in his Tesla ain't even been arrested once? Come on. His answer was simple, and it was the hill he planted his flag on. David didn't do it. Charleston knew those words would spark outrage. He knew critics would accuse him of minimizing a child's death, of excusing what couldn't be excused. But Charleston had never run from backlash. He thrived on it. Controversy was his stage, and the louder people screamed, the stronger he dug his heels in. So while social media ripped itself in half, some calling him a truth teller, others a troll, Charleston doubled down, refusing to retreat a single inch. Charleston wasn't backing off, not even close. He pushed his audience to stop and think about every case they'd ever seen where young black men got dragged into courtrooms over nothing but rumors, locked up on suspicions, cuffed on maybe, and probably, tossed into cells before the ink on a headline even dried. And now here was David's case. DNA whispers, tattoo rumors, lyrics dissected like confessions, a body in his car, and still no arrest? To Charleston White, that wasn't luck. That was innocence, plain and simple. And millions of viewers online couldn't help but pause, replay, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had a point. Because Charleston's defense of David didn't come out of nowhere. To understand why his words went nuclear, why his voice stirred millions of comments, and why people gave weight to what sounded like outrageous claims, you have to understand the man himself. Charleston White isn't just another loudmouth with a mic. He's a figure forged in fire, controversy, and contradiction. Born in 1977 in Texas, Charleston's story veered into darkness early. At just 14 years old, he was caught in a violent altercation outside a Foot Locker, an incident that ended with a man dead. Tried as an adult, convicted of murder, and sentenced to prison, Charleston spent the rest of his teenage years locked away, branded with a criminal record that would shadow him forever. To his critics, that past proves he has no moral high ground to stand on. But to Charleston, that stain is the very foundation of his fire. He walked out of prison at 21 carrying the weight of what he'd done, but determined to flip his story. For a time, it looked like he had. He reinvented himself as a community activist, preaching to kids about staying out of gangs, pushing back against the streets that once claimed him. He even founded his own organization, Hypocrisy Over Politics, HOPI, with a mission to steer young people away from the traps that nearly destroyed him. For a while, it seemed like Charleston was walking the path of redemption. A man transformed, turning scars into lessons for the next generation. But as anyone watching closely could tell, controversy never stopped clinging to him, and in this moment, defending David against the darkest accusations of his era, Charleston was once again proving that he lives for the firestorm and maybe even knows how to use it better than anyone else. But Charleston was never cut out for quiet redemption. Not even close. His personality was too loud, his energy too raw, his need to provoke too strong. The spotlight wasn't something he ran from. It was something he dragged back to himself, kicking and screaming. By the 2020s, Charleston wasn't known as a reformed activist anymore. He was infamous, a firebrand, a walking headline, the man who would call out anyone, rappers, politicians, even whole communities. Nobody was safe. T.I., BarzBuzz, countless others, he dropped their names like weapons, using every feud as fuel to build his online empire. And he didn't stop at critiquing careers. No, Charleston went for jugulars. Families, parenting, reputations. Nothing was off limits. Every insult went viral. Every feud brought him more followers. And every outburst left the internet buzzing with the same question. Is Charleston White a truth teller with no filter? Or just the ultimate clout chaser who will say anything for attention? The examples stacked up quick. Take his feud with streamer Adin Ross. Pure chaos. During a live stream in 2023, Charleston pepper sprayed Ross's associate right there on camera. Instant mayhem. Legal threats flew. Clips hit every platform within hours, cementing Charleston once again as volatile, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. And then there was the comedy show incident. A heckler pushed his buttons, and instead of cooling things down, Charleston pulled out stacks of cash, waving them in the crowd's face like a taunt. To some, it was hilarious, almost performance art. To others, it was proof Charleston wasn't the reformed activist he pretended to be. He was a showman, hooked on outrage, feeding off the very chaos he claimed to fight against. That's the contradiction that makes him magnetic. One minute, Charleston is on stage condemning gangs, lecturing about accountability. And the next, he's creating his own circus, proving he's just as reckless as the people he attacks. And that's exactly why people can't look away. One minute, Charleston is preaching about accountability. The next, he's tearing into victims, mocking tragedies, and laughing at death itself. In September 2025, he crossed yet another line, cursing out the grieving family of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk right after his passing. Charleston coldly dismissed it as just white-on-white crime and laughed. That single moment captured the duality of Charleston White perfectly, part social critic, part troll, and all chaos rolled into one. That's the power of his voice. When Charleston speaks, people tune in for two reasons. Either they truly believe he's exposing uncomfortable truths nobody else dares to say, or they're waiting to catch him slipping, contradicting himself in public. Either way, his words travel like wildfire. And that's why, when he turned his spotlight onto David's case, it wasn't just noise, it mattered. Because Charleston's voice doesn't echo in silence. It thrives right at the heart of controversy. This time, his target wasn't just another rapper he had beef with, or some politician he despised. No, Charleston went bigger. He went at the system itself, staking his name on the claim that David was innocent. By then, his reputation wasn't clean or polished. It was a messy patchwork of scandals, hot takes, viral feuds, and shock moments. He wasn't some outsider randomly stepping into the story. He was already a storm. And when he stepped into David's case, it was like throwing thunder on top of lightning. And Charleston had already proven his willingness to mock the sacred. Back in early 2024, he went viral for clowning the tragic deaths of Chicago's King Von and Houston's Takeoff. He didn't mourn them, didn't honor their legacies. Instead, he laughed, calling their deaths the natural end for street life. Clips of his comments exploded across social media, cementing Charleston as a man who had no respect for untouchable ground. If he could joke about fallen rap legends, it was clear Charleston wasn't afraid to poke holes in anyone's story, no matter how raw or sensitive. This was the moment Charleston stopped being seen as a reformed activist and fully embraced the role of professional antagonist. The turning point, his ugly feud with BarzBuzz. Charleston didn't hold back. He straight up accused Boozy of being a terrible father, claiming his parenting decisions were setting his kids up for the same crime and chaos he himself had barely escaped. It wasn't just shade, it was a public attack on Boozy's family, and once Boozy clapped back, Charleston doubled down with threats that blurred the line between comedy skit and real-life menace. To Charleston, it was just keeping it real. To critics, it was harassment that crossed the line. And he didn't stop with rappers. Even law enforcement became his target. He mocked police chiefs, ridiculed whole departments, and in one infamous rant even claimed he'd shoot any cop who tried him. The contradictions stacked higher by the day. Here was a man who built his platform by denouncing gang violence, yet glorified confrontation and armed defiance at every turn. But that contradiction was Charleston White. He thrived on it. Every insult, every feud, every wild statement only amplified his name. By 2025, he wasn't viewed as an activist anymore. He was a one-man media circus, brandishing guns on Instagram Live, clowning rappers in interviews, stirring the pot non-stop. Charleston had cracked the formula. Controversy equals currency, and he was cashing in big. So when Charleston suddenly jumped into David's case, critics rolled their eyes instantly. They claimed this wasn't about justice or truth. It was just Charleston chasing clout. And what bigger story to exploit than a teenage pop star accused of murder? The perfect stage for a provocateur addicted to outrage. But here's the paradox that made his involvement so powerful. The more people accused Charleston of clout chasing, the more traction his words gained. Every attack against him only pushed his narrative further into the spotlight. Suddenly, what might have been dismissed as just noise turned into a nationwide debate, not just about David's guilt, but about whether Charleston White had uncovered a truth the media didn't want to admit. Charleston's defense of David wasn't whispered in backrooms or hidden on small podcasts. It was blasted across YouTube, TikTok, and X for the whole world to consume, debate, and dissect. One fiery clip stripped from its full context racked up millions of views almost overnight. Some mocked him, others stitched the video nodding in agreement, and countless more filled the comments with lines like, "I don't like Charleston, but he's not lying." That right there was the twisted power of Charleston White. Hated, controversial, but impossible to ignore. His credibility was constantly under attack, yet his influence only grew stronger. Even people who despised him couldn't resist hitting play, couldn't resist engaging with his chaos. And that's why, when Charleston stepped forward as David's unlikely defender, the internet couldn't look away. It wasn't just commentary anymore, it was spectacle. But for Charleston, this wasn't only about David, it was about him too. When he defended the young rapper, he was projecting his own life onto the case. To Charleston, David wasn't just another headline or another accused celebrity, he was a symbol, a reflection of Charleston's own scarred youth, and maybe even a chance for him to rewrite his own story through someone else's trial. For decades, Charleston had been pounding the same message into anyone who would listen. America doesn't hesitate to lock up young black men, with or without hard proof. And he wasn't speaking from theory, he lived it. At just 14 years old, Charleston's life was sealed with a prison sentence. One teenage mistake stretched into a permanent scar, a stain that shaped every headline, every accusation, every arrest he's witnessed since. So when he looked at David, standing accused but still free, Charleston saw something rare. To him, this wasn't proof of guilt. It was proof that the story didn't add up. In David's case, Charleston swore he recognized the same trap he himself had once fallen into. Only this time, the system hadn't pulled the trigger yet. They don't let young black men walk free on crimes like this. Not in America, he barked. Those weren't just hot words for clicks, they were a confession. Charleston truly believed that if the justice system had no problem throwing him behind bars as a child, they would have done the same to David if the evidence were really airtight. To him, the fact David was still free didn't mean negligence, it meant innocence. But under all the theatrics, there was a deeper layer. David, like Charleston once was a young black man caught in the crosshairs of a narrative he couldn't control. Whether guilty or innocent, the court of public opinion had already stamped him guilty. Charleston knew that sting, the judgment that comes long before a trial. And in David, he saw himself. That was the cruel irony. The same Charleston White who mocked dead rappers, disrespected victims, and built fame out of stirring outrage was suddenly playing the role of guardian, fighting to protect a young star the world was lining up to crucify. Whether you believed him or not, his defense made the entire saga impossible to ignore. Because at its core, Charleston wasn't just defending David, he was defending his own reflection, his own survival story, and his lifelong belief that the system is rigged and never plays fair. And while Charleston's fiery clips spread like wildfire, the case itself kept twisting in new directions. Fresh leaks dropped, new speculation flooded timelines, and official updates dripped out just enough to keep the mystery alive. The deeper the investigation went, the murkier it all became. And Charleston's voice stayed planted right in the middle of it, daring the world to admit that maybe, just maybe, the narrative wasn't what it seemed. Here's the latest twist in the D4vd case, and the implications are chilling. Authorities officially confirmed that the body found stuffed inside the Tesla was indeed the missing 15-year-old girl whose disappearance had already shaken the community to its core. The details were gruesome. Her remains dismembered, hidden deep in the trunk, showing clear signs of deliberate concealment. For the public, this looked like nothing less than a smoking gun. But even with the horror laid bare, law enforcement stayed frustratingly tight-lipped. Reporters hammered them with questions, but the officials gave the same dry line on repeat. No arrests have been made at this time. That phrase became a mantra, echoing through every article, every broadcast, every press conference, as if someone had scripted it. Meanwhile, the internet turned the tragedy into pure spectacle. TikTok sleuths dissected David's lyrics, treating songs like Romantic Homicide as if they were confessions scribbled in blood. Fans combed through his music videos frame by frame, pointing at imagery they swore matched the crime. Others pulled out calendars and tour schedules, cross-referencing David's movements with the timeline of the girl's disappearance, searching for overlaps like detectives with hashtags. And yet, despite all the noise, not a single hard link was released. No DNA report made public, no eyewitness statement, no confirmed digital trail putting David at the scene. Just whispers, speculation, and a mountain of circumstantial dots that everyone was desperate to connect. But don't be fooled, the case wasn't frozen. Behind the curtain, detectives were grinding. Leaks hinted they were tracing digital records, combing through cell phone pings, and pulling communications. Interstate agencies even got involved since the Tesla and the body inside it allegedly crossed state lines before discovery. Each leak made the case feel bigger, more tangled, more sinister. And that's exactly where Charleston's commentary turned dangerous. While police stayed quiet and evidence dripped slow, Charleston was out front, blasting his voice across the internet, boldly declaring David innocent. His words weren't just opinions, they were shaping the conversation, tilting the entire case into a battle of perception. Charleston wasn't just defending David, he was reshaping the whole story. Millions of viewers, especially die-hard David fans, began parroting his words across social media. Hashtags like #FreeDavid and #Charleston said it exploded on X, climbing into trending lists like wildfire. That's the strange power of viral commentary in today's world. It doesn't just react to news, it rewrites it. And in David's case, Charleston White had become the loudest pen on the page. His voice wasn't just echoing online, it was steering the conversation. Suddenly, his defense wasn't confined to YouTube rants or TikTok stitches, it was spilling over into mainstream coverage. Outlets that once focused only on police statements and forensic updates now had to deal with an unpredictable wild card, Charleston White. Journalists who had spent months chasing evidence suddenly found themselves forced to write about him. A man with no badge, no courtroom credentials, no legal expertise, just a megaphone too loud to ignore. Opinion columns popped up overnight. Some blasted him as reckless, accusing him of undermining an active investigation by shouting innocent without proof. Others, however, were more cautious. They begrudgingly admitted that Charleston's central point, the glaring absence of an arrest, despite what looked like damning evidence, wasn't completely baseless. That was the ripple effect. Charleston had dragged himself into the center of one of the biggest scandals of the decade, and the world, whether it liked him or not, was being forced to listen. Love him or hate him, one fact was undeniable. Charleston had yanked the David case out of the shadows and shoved it into a brighter, messier spotlight. Fans split into warring digital camps, and the battleground was brutal. On one side were David's diehard supporters, many of them teenagers who clung to Charleston's words like scripture. They quoted his analogies, stitched his clips, and repeated his mantra like a chant. He'd be locked up already. On the other side were furious critics who saw Charleston's defense as a slap in the face to the victim and her grieving family. The online fights weren't just debates, they turned vicious. Users doxed each other, leaked personal info, and dragged the investigation into an ugly war of timelines, theories, and insults. What should have been a solemn pursuit of justice had mutated into the internet's latest battlefield. Brands couldn't ignore the chaos either. Several companies that had already begun quietly distancing themselves from David now found themselves cornered. Do they cut ties completely and risk alienating his millions of loyal fans? Or do they wait it out, terrified Charleston might actually be right and David could eventually walk free? The uncertainty froze endorsements in place, leaving David's public image dangling in limbo, not destroyed, but far from repaired. Meanwhile, law enforcement wasn't swayed by hashtags or viral rants. They rarely addressed Charleston directly, but subtle pushbacks began slipping through. Quiet leaks suggested investigators were still grinding, combing through hours of surveillance, sifting through online messages, and collecting testimonies. Behind the noise of social media wars, the cops were building something piece by piece. Whether it would collapse Charleston's narrative or confirm his suspicions was a question the whole world was now holding its breath to see. Anonymous sources whispered that the absence of an arrest wasn't proof of innocence at all. It was strategy. Prosecutors didn't want to rush charges only to see the case collapse in court. But that quiet resistance only gave Charleston more fire to burn. Every delay, every vague press release, every stiff no comment became fuel. To Charleston, hesitation was weakness, and weakness meant one thing: they had nothing. He told his audience flat out, "The system is stalling because the system is empty." And the longer it dragged on, the more powerful his voice became. Charleston flipped silence into spectacle. Every unanswered question, every blank space in the official story became his canvas. And in the online arena, that was enough to keep shifting public opinion day after day. What started as a murder investigation had mutated into a cultural hurricane. This wasn't just about David anymore. It was about race, justice, celebrity, and the way guilt gets decided in the viral era. And sitting dead center wasn't a cop, a prosecutor, or even a journalist. It was Charleston White, louder than the police, brasher than the lawyers, and more viral than the reporters trying to stick to the facts. As weeks bled into months, the David case grew bigger than the investigation itself. It became a mirror, reflecting how society devours crime stories, how celebrity turns tragedy into entertainment, and how controversy fuels clicks more than truth ever could. And at the core of it all, Charleston White, the self-crowned disruptor, spinning chaos into currency. Meanwhile, the official investigation trudged on, slow, methodical, faceless. Detectives quietly pieced together digital trails, analyzed phone pings, and pulled in federal help as the case stretched across state lines. But none of that held the internet's attention like Charleston did. For David's fans, his voice wasn't just commentary, it was hope. In a world eager to bury their idol, Charleston gave them a lifeline, a reason to keep believing. Flawed or not, his arguments gave fans a script to push back against headlines. And in the online age, sometimes the narrative hits harder than the facts. That's the trap, the twist, the unsettling truth. While cops built their case in silence, Charleston thrived in the waiting game. And with every day that passed without an arrest, his words didn't just echo, they thundered louder. The case isn't closed. The truth still hides in shadows. But one thing is undeniable. Charleston White didn't just comment on this story, he remixed it. He flipped the rhythm of the entire case. He made David's innocence a topic just as loud, just as viral, and just as debated as the crime itself. What should have been a straightforward investigation became a cultural spectacle, where speculation turned into debate, debate into endless content, and content into raw influence. Not just for Charleston, but for David too. And the consequences? They're still unraveling in real time. David's career now hangs in dangerous limbo, suspended between a loyal fan base that clings to Charleston's mantra and an industry too scared to back him until the dust clears. For law enforcement, the stakes are even higher. If they make a move without airtight evidence, Charleston's voice will come crashing back to haunt them, amplifying every misstep across millions of screens. For the public, this case is a brutal reminder. In the age of clicks, clips, and commentary, truth doesn't travel alone. It collides with narratives, it competes with influencers, and sometimes it gets drowned out altogether. And in this storm, one thing became crystal clear. Charleston White proved that in today's world, being louder than the system might just be enough to rewrite history itself. And that's where we stand. The David case is still wide open. The truth tangled between silence from investigators and chaos from the internet. But one thing is crystal clear: Charleston White hijacked the narrative. He didn't just defend David, he forced the world to pause, argue, and wonder if the system itself might be playing games. Whether you think he's a truth teller, a troll, or just chasing clout, his voice is now stitched into this story forever. David's fate hangs in the balance. His career frozen, his name stained, his fans split between loyalty and doubt. The industry is watching, law enforcement is watching, and so are millions online. Because in this new era, guilt or innocence isn't just decided in a courtroom, it's fought for in hashtags, live streams, and viral clips. And that's why you need to keep your eyes on this saga, because it's far from over. When the next leak drops, when the next twist hits, you know where the real breakdown will be waiting, right here on BarzBuzz, where the story never sleeps and the truth always cuts deeper.